In the annals of ancient history, a conflict erupted that forever altered the face of the Hellenic world. The clash between Athens, the formidable leader of the vast Delian League encompassing numerous city-states and colonies, and Sparta, the head of the powerful Peloponnesian League, became the arena for an unprecedented confrontation. On one side stood an unparalleled naval fleet, embodying innovation and might on the waves, while on the other was one of the most dominant and battle-hardened infantry armies ever to march upon the earth. This epical confrontation unfolded against the backdrop of recent, yet already legendary events. Just decades earlier, Athens had achieved a triumphant victory over Persian invaders in the decisive Battle of Marathon. Then, 10 years later, significantly outnumbered Persian invasion forces faced a series of crushing setbacks and defeats. These tragedies began in the narrow pass of Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans famously fought valiantly to the last man, delaying an entire army and creating an immortal myth of self-sacrifice. This was followed by a massive naval defeat of the Persian fleet at Salamis at the hands of skilled Athenian sailors, and finally, at Plataea, the Persian land army was utterly routed, leading to its decimation and ultimately, the complete abandonment of their campaign. These events not only saved Greece from subjugation but also laid the groundwork for future antagonisms. Over the subsequent half-century, both great powers, Athens and Sparta, pursued consistent anti-Persian policies, actively supporting any activities aimed at countering Persian influence in the eastern Mediterranean. It was this shared objective that allowed an intermittent, yet nonetheless existing, peace to be maintained between Athens and Sparta. To effectively counter the Persian threat at sea, the Athenians formed the Delian League. However, by gradually expanding their control over its members, Athens transformed this initially defensive coalition into a true maritime empire, levying tribute from its subordinate states. From the colossal funds obtained from their client city-states, Athens erected a city that became the envy of the entire Hellenic world and built a fleet of 300 triremes. Each of these formidable vessels was manned by a crew of 170 professional rowers, whose coordinated effort and skill made the Athenian fleet invincible. Thus, two great powers, one relying on naval might, the other on invincible infantry, inexorably moved toward an inevitable collision whose consequences would be felt for centuries. Prior to the Persian Wars, Corinth, as a city-state, was an undisputed naval power. However, with the rise of Athenian might, their navy significantly surpassed Corinth's, achieving a 3-to-1 ratio, and began actively provoking revolts in Corinth's colonies and encroaching upon its vital trade routes. During a 15-year period marked by a series of localized skirmishes, known as the First Peloponnesian War, Sparta confronted Athens. In one ambiguous battle, the Spartans defeated the Athenian army, while Athens steadily continued to build up its naval strength. Significant developments during this time included the extensive rebuilding and strengthening of Athens' walls, as well as the construction of a long fortified road connecting the city to the port of Piraeus. This strategic structure allowed Athens to be entirely self-sufficient by sea, even if an invading army devastated the surrounding countryside and agricultural lands. This tense period concluded with the so-called 30 Years' Peace between the two city-states, though this treaty lasted significantly less than half its intended duration. Despite the formal truce, an irreconcilable enmity persisted between Athens and Corinth. In 431 BC, Corinth successfully persuaded Sparta and the Peloponnesian League to declare war on Athens with the aim of ending the burgeoning Athenian Empire. The initial phase of the broader conflict, known as the Second Peloponnesian War, and more commonly referred to simply as the Peloponnesian War, was named the Archidamian War. During this period, Sparta adopted a tactic of systematically ravaging the rural areas surrounding Athens, with the clear goal of provoking a pitched battle. However, the Athenians, with foresight, anticipated such a Spartan strategy and promptly arranged for the uninterrupted delivery of grain, which arrived from Egypt and numerous colonies located on the coasts of the Aegean and Black Seas. Athens' own strategy involved completely blockading the Peloponnesian Peninsula from all trade and supplies, while launching sudden raids on Sparta's allies at the first opportune moment. Although it initially seemed as if the Athenians maintained a dominant position in this asymmetric war of attrition, meticulously planned over many years by the eminent Athenian statesman Pericles, the population from the surrounding rural areas flocked en masse seeking protection within the Athenian walls. In the early stages of this protracted conflict, this influx of people had been anticipated, and wealthy Athens, thanks to its well-developed logistical chains, possessed more than sufficient food supplies to feed all inhabitants in the overcrowded city. However, one circumstance was completely unforeseen: contaminated grain shipments carrying the pathogens of a plague that rapidly spread through the densely populated city. Initially, the polis held firm, inspired by Pericles' powerful and charismatic rhetoric. Nevertheless, tragically, an estimated 1 in 4 Athenians, including Pericles himself and his sons, fell victim to this devastating epidemic before it finally exhausted its deadly force. When the epidemic reached its peak, mercenary warriors adamantly refused to fight for Athens, and the Spartans, gripped by fear of the deadly plague, ceased their military campaigns in the immediate vicinity of the Athenian walls. Ironically, it was Athens' extensive naval blockade of the Peloponnese that inadvertently prevented Sparta and its allies from receiving plague-infected grain. Recovering from the shock, the surviving citizens of Athens adopted a significantly more aggressive strategy. They substantially increased the scale of their raids and began constructing fortified strongholds along the Peloponnesian coast. Helots, Spartan slaves whose numbers outnumbered the Spartans themselves tenfold, were actively encouraged to flee to these new fortifications. This move created tangible pressure on Sparta, forcing it to deploy significant forces to defend its own territories. This phase of the conflict culminated in the signing of the so-called 50-year Peace of Nicias. However, this peace treaty never fully took effect, as both warring parties continued to conduct mutual raids from the outset, first using proxies and later directly. In 415 BC, the Athenians formulated an ambitious plan which, in their deep conviction, would ensure their undisputed supremacy: the subjugation of the extraordinarily prosperous city-state of Syracuse on the island of Sicily. This strategically vital center, alongside Athens and Carthage, held a dominant share in the extensive Mediterranean trade. Under the command of the young, charismatic Athenian statesman Alcibiades, a significant military expedition ended in complete disaster for the Athenian polis. Athens suffered monstrous losses, over 10,000 hoplites, who formed the backbone of their heavy infantry, and 2/3 of their entire mighty fleet. While the physical hulls of the ships could later be rebuilt, the true and irreplaceable loss was the 30,000 professional rowers, whose specialized skills and years of arduous training were absolutely indispensable in the short term. This immense human resource, critically important for maintaining naval supremacy, represented a strategic void that Athens simply could not fill. The cascade of misfortunes continued to unfold relentlessly. Following these naval and land setbacks, Sparta dealt another crushing blow by freeing 20,000 Athenian slaves working in the city's vital silver mines. This move not only deprived Athens of a significant portion of its workforce but also severely undermined a crucial source of its economic stability and military funding. In a desperate attempt to replenish its depleted treasury, Athens subsequently sharply increased the tribute demanded from its vassal states. However, this desperate measure had catastrophic consequences, provoking widespread and fierce revolts throughout Ionia, a region so deeply affected that this final, tumultuous phase of the protracted conflict became known as the Ionian War. In a dramatic turn of events, the Athenian commander Alcibiades, fearing severe retribution for his catastrophic failure, made the calculated and controversial decision to defect to Sparta. This betrayal proved to be a significant strategic gain for Sparta, which at this critical juncture began receiving immense financial resources from the powerful Persian Empire. Persia, always keenly observing the shifting balance of power, perceived the Athenian Empire as a formidable and growing threat to its own interests, and therefore actively sought to undermine its influence. Significantly bolstered by these enormous Persian subsidies, Sparta was able to embark on an ambitious program of rebuilding and expanding its fleet, greatly strengthening its naval capabilities. This newfound strength, combined with the unwavering support of its Corinthian allies, led to the decisive and utterly devastating defeat of the Athenian fleet at the Battle of Aegospotami. With its naval power virtually annihilated, and its once dominant fleet reduced to a pale shadow, Athens found itself vulnerable and defenseless. As a result, the city was swiftly besieged by Spartan forces and, finding itself in an impossible situation, was forced to surrender immediately. However, the Spartan hegemony that emerged from the ashes of the Peloponnesian War, though seemingly absolute, proved surprisingly short-lived. Its inherent vulnerability, its Achilles heel, lay in its most valuable and unique resource, the Spartan warriors themselves. Their numbers, meticulously maintained through a strict and exclusive socio-military system, were simply too small to effectively govern and sustain a vast empire. This intrinsic demographic limitation prevented Sparta from effectively consolidating its extensive control for any significant duration. Ultimately, after a series of smaller-scale but exhausting conflicts that further wore down an already war-weary Greek world following the devastating Peloponnesian War, the stage was set for a new power. It was Philip of Macedon, the shrewd and ambitious father of the legendary Alexander the Great, who seized this opportune moment, successfully conquering the fragmented and deeply weakened Greek city-states, thereby fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape of the ancient Hellenic world.